Nigel Farage is a populist leader in our country. Maybe he could be regarded as Britain's Donald Trump. That's one sort of perhaps reductive way of looking at Nigel Farage. He recently said in an interview with the BBC that NATO had to bear some responsibility for their actions, and indeed Western powers had to acknowledge their culpability when it came to provoking Russia into their invasion of Ukraine.
We've provoked this war.
Now, many of you will be familiar with the work of Jeffrey Sachs or John Mearsheimer or actual history, and will know that in this matter at least, Nigel Farage is simply telling the truth. That's why it's fascinating to see Rishi Sunak, financier, globalist stooge, current Prime Minister, and Keir Starmer, member of the establishment, former head of the Crown Prosecution Service, potential persecutor of Julian Assange, singing from the exact same song sheet. Essentially a double act. Being asked to choose between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer in a general election is like choosing between Morecambe and Wise or Abbott and Costello. You might have a favourite particular member of a double act, but what do you think the meaningful difference is between two establishment stooges that parrot the talking points of the globalist elites whenever they're questioned or inquired of? One would say perhaps the fanfare and excitement of a general election and the fervour of pundits is all going to waste if what you're invited to vote for is one of two sock puppets, representatives of the same uniparty. To illustrate this point, here they both are saying the exact same thing on the subject of, forget for a minute Nigel Farage. I know he's becoming increasingly popular in this country. And if you are anti-establishment, I recognise that you will look for anti-establishment figures. And maybe you will interrogate that. Well, is he anti-establishment? Where does Nigel Farage get his funding from? Is he also a member of the city establishment? You tell me what you think in the comments. I don't want sovereignty over anyone except for me and my family. That's it. That can be my little fiefdom, my personal little domain. Be me and my kids and my wife, and frankly I can't control them, certainly not on long car journeys in hot weather. Cast that aside for a moment if you will, and look at both Keir Starmer, next Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, current Prime Minister, not only condemning Nigel Farage, but denying the idea that Putin was provoked. Look at this. You should be alarmed by this. It should reveal something to you. It should show you that you might be excited about getting rid of one government, but if you get rid of a government in order to simply replace them with a set of principles, ideas, virtues, edicts, and interests that are, broadly speaking, identical, you're wasting your time. And the whole system is a waste of time. And we will provide further examples of why optimism and Starmageddon do not belong in the same sentence.
What he said was completely wrong and only plays into Putin's hands.
It's played into Putin's hand. Putin will be loving this. Okay, what's happening today? Well, Nigel Farage has pointed out that NATO expansionism has provoked us. Yes, that goes right into my hands. And now to poison some people on the streets of Britain.
This is a man who deployed nerve agents on the streets of Britain.
Like the KGB maybe did kill someone in Britain, but as Donald Trump once said, do you think our deep state agents don't get involved with stuff like that?
Putin's a killer.
A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? You think our country's so innocent?
Think there ain't CIA bases in Ukraine? Think British special forces aren't involved in blowing up bridges in Crimea? If it amounts to our espionage, our spying, our skullduggery, our international murders, our corruption is okay and theirs isn't, what kind of government is that? What kind of ideology is that? How can we get excited about that? How will you not find the affability of populists more appealing than this bland, bureaucratic, cynical, corrupt bullshit?
Who's doing deals with countries like North Korea, and this kind of appeasement is dangerous for Britain's security.
Appeasement was a word that was very popular in the First and Second World War, and they are trying to deploy the very same kind of jingoism that they would condemn in their opponents.
The security of our allies that rely on us, and only emboldens Putin further.
Putin's really emboldened now. And now to my sidekick, the next Prime Minister of your country and man who had curious meetings with the CIA when Jeremy Corbyn was the head of Labour, and appears to have taken extraordinary visits that have been wiped from the CPS records to America that potentially pertain to Julian Assange's ongoing incarceration, Keir Starmer. Now, if you're considering voting for Keir Starmer, imagine this. Imagine if, for the last couple of years in opposition, Keir Starmer had been continually visiting Belmarsh, making public statements. It's a disgrace that Julian Assange is in prison. It's outrageous. The guy's a journalist. Why was he in jail in the first place? There's not even been a trial. This is ridiculous. All he did was expose corruption. And you'd go, wow, this guy is a leader. This guy is at least opposing the current establishment, but he didn't do that, did he? He got baffled and befuddled and confused and in a muddle whenever he was asked a complicated question about emerging identity and gender politics, unable to cope with that. He opened the courts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week when there is a little bit of uprising across the United Kingdom, because in Rishi Sunak, we had a Prime Minister that was a Moderna globalist stooge. Look into Infosys, his father-in-law's company. Look into his relationship with the hedge fund that invested in Moderna before the pandemic. And for Keir Starmer, you have a globalist. I prefer Davos. He's on record as saying that Davos is more important than the elected parliament of the country that I'm about to lead. He is, in effect, an authoritarian, centrist, bureaucrat member of the state machinery. In Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, you have the twin, all too local polarities of what global corporatism looks like. On one hand, financial power. On the other hand, state bureaucracy. In both hands, a grip around the throat of freedom. If you want to be free, you can't vote for people like that. Don't get all terrified. Oh no, but then maybe this will happen or that will happen. Reject the establishment if you don't like it. Reject hypocrisy if you don't like it. Reject corruption if you don't like it. Invite something beautiful into your heart. Why exactly was Keir Starmer meeting with the CIA? Why exactly was he opening the courts 24/7? Why exactly did he deny young people the right to anonymity so they could be prosecuted as adults after some riots in the UK about 10 years ago? Look it up when he was head of the CPS. And why was he visiting Washington? And did it have anything to do with the imprisonment of Julian Assange and his presumed extradition? And if it did, what kind of leader are we electing? And should there be fanfare and excitement about him? Woohoo! We got rid of the Tories to do something barely different at all. Indistinguishable. Let's celebrate. Let's celebrate the tiny gap between these two stooges. We can't continue to bring you this beautiful content without the support of our partners. Hey, this is exciting. We've got a great partner today. It's Rumble. But beyond Rumble, it's Rumble's latest venture. Let me ask you first, are you a Sleepy Joe type character with zero cognitive performance, struggling to muster focus and brain power for basic things like running the United States of America? You've got to stop drinking woke liberal coffee that hates you and your way of life and start your day by drinking Rumble's very own 1775 coffee. This is going to be the best tasting coffee you've ever had. Seriously good, ethically sourced from a family farm in the high altitude mountains of Bolivia. Not in the Bolivian lowlands run not by a family but by a single man still living with a pet. No! Instead of waking up and drinking your big corporation owned woke ideology coffee that's probably making you sick from the pesticides it's sprayed with, try Rumble's 1775 revolutionary coffee. Support freedom of speech. Build a parallel economy that actually values you and loves you. My favourite? It's dark, of course. I've always found the lure of the dark irresistible. I'm sorry, how can I stay mad at you? You're just going to have to wait over there for a little while. Level up your morning routine with a 1775 coffee. Sleep all night knowing your hard-earned dollary dues are going towards supporting freedom-loving creators like me on Rumble. Visit 1775coffee.com now, pick up your first bag, use the code BRAND to save 10% on your first order. Oh, come on. Why choose, you know? Okay, back to the content.
Farage's comments about Russia and Ukraine are disgraceful. I've always been clear that Putin bears responsibility, sole responsibility, for the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And I think anybody who wants to stand to be a representative in our parliament should be really clear that whether it's Russian aggression on the battlefield or online...
online aggression. I can understand concern about Russia's actual invasion of Ukraine, which must be terrifying for the poor Ukrainian people who are being played like pawns like the rest of us in this globalist endeavour. But what, you're worried about bots now, when we know that our nations are just as guilty of that same kind of insurrectionist, insidious activity in China, in the Philippines, and presumably in Russia? That's just standard fare. You can't condemn them for that, and if you can't take a little bit of abuse on the internet, well, bloody hell, don't start looking at my X-feed, baby.
That we stand against that aggression. That's, standing behind Ukraine, but also standing up for our freedom.
Right, we've got to stand up for our freedom. Thank you. Stand up for our freedom. I want to tell you something. I've known John Oliver for a very long time. I've done stand-up gigs with John Oliver in front of like 10, 20, 30 people, small rooms. That guy, 20 years ago, I reckon, maybe even longer ago, he is a nerd about politics. He loved politics. He's interested in it. So whatever John Oliver is, he really believes, I think, in what he's saying. And I also believe he's very, very funny. And his success in the United States of America is well deserved. But I must say that when I saw him saying that a victory for Keir Starmer would be a victory for democracy, even if those weren't the literal words he used, I felt kind of conflicted. John Oliver said that July the 4th was the opportunity for British people to have our own Independence Day. That the 4th of July needn't mean a kind of a moment of embarrassment. Oh, God, that was awful, wasn't it? When they kicked us out for our taxes without representation. It was a good premise for a joke. John Oliver, I would say, is extremely funny and extremely good comedian. But this is something I believe is important, and I think might be, perhaps you tell me, the most important thing when it comes to politics in countries like yours and ours. If you're going to vote for someone that's ultimately going to do precisely the same sort of stuff that the previous government did, that doesn't have any real ideas, and just use the Julian Assange example if you want as a kind of barometer for this one, in Keir Starmer, you're not voting for a leader who's like, for the last 4 years, we've got to get Julian Assange out of that prison. This is ridiculous. It's free speech. We've got to have a free press. No, you're voting for someone who was the head of the CPS that potentially collaborated with, maybe even conspired to ensure that Julian Assange didn't get a fair trial, didn't get freedom, didn't get to stay in the Ecuadorian embassy, even though that's a very peculiar wish to grant of anybody. Some might recall that Keir Starmer didn't prosecute Jimmy Savile when he had the opportunity. So being hysterical, he was a brutal sexual predator in our country for a while, that had interesting ties to the royal family and all sorts of charities and powerful figures, kind of like a British Epstein in a way. You'll note that a lot of establishment figures seem to have peculiar sex stuff going on. I'm not talking about promiscuity. I'm not talking about being out there, getting amongst it. I'm talking about weird stuff that involves trafficking, going to islands, and people being sort of manoeuvred around, and peculiar, extraordinary, dark. What I think is fascinating here in this John Oliver video is the endorsement of keeping politics between very narrow lines. Again, I like John Oliver as a comedian and as a human being, actually, as from what I remember of him the years ago when I used to know him. But the idea that British people should be satisfied with getting rid of the Conservatives, the Tories, our right-wing-ish party, is laughable, risible, and ridiculous, and amounts to simply championing and trumpeting for the establishment to get another 4 years, this time in the form of another authoritarian, centralist bureaucrat, prosecutor of the innocent. I prefer Davos to Westminster marionette. Let's have a look at that as a sort of an opportunity to examine what people mean when they say that organisations like HBO ultimately parrot talking points of the establishment and even amplify their agenda. Think of some of Alex Jones's remarks about his HBO streamed trials, which of course extraordinarily continues to use the idea that it's the victims of Sandy Hook that are being supported, and God knows anyone that's lost a child, they deserve limitless love, limitless support. But is the ongoing shutting down of InfoWars and Alex Jones about that? It's a question that we can continue to ask. Let's have a look at this.
Because on July 4th, Britain has a chance to wash itself clean of 14 miserable years of Conservative rule, and is a chance it simply must take. If I may quote Bill Pullman yelling about aliens, if we do this, the 4th of July will no longer be known as just an American holiday. but also as the day when Britain looked at the Conservatives, who've driven the entire country into a ditch.
The thing is, though, that the Labour Party will remain in that ditch. I wonder what single policy could be pointed to as an example of how there will be change for ordinary British people. I wonder what in particular about Keir Starmer's past or history or vision for the future could be celebrated as bringing about the kind of change that this piece seems to be calling forth, beckoning, celebrating, because I don't see that happening. Keir Starmer is Tony Blair without the charisma, and Tony Blair without the charisma is just a war criminal. So God knows what kind of globalist nightmares may await us if people happily go vote for Keir Starmer saying, well, it's not perfect, it's the best we can do. The best we can do is what's gotten us in this mess. We need to become radical. We need to awaken to new possibility. We need to look for new alliances. Anything that's a vote against the establishment, even if that's not voting at all, is better than supporting the ongoing establishment tyranny in the form of interchangeable bureaucrats. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think? Can you think of a single political leader that's saying we're going to end the donations, we're going to end the lobbying, we're going to end the corruption, we're going to end the divisiveness culturally, we're going to empower you individually, we're going to do whatever it takes to ensure that your mandates, your referenda are what we govern by. We are your servants. We are no longer your leaders. We can no longer claim those principles. We've made too many mistakes for too long. You're in charge now. Make your own mistakes. If you want no more immigration, you go for it. We'll assess the situation down the line. If you want no more intervention in foreign wars, you go for it. Seems like a good idea. If you want no more enrichment of the corporate class, then that's what we'll end. If you want an end to financial corruption internationally and the same sets of interests being able to implement their agenda in various nations through various bureaucracies, we will support your right to do that. These centralist political systems exist only to facilitate ongoing globalism and corporatism. We know that. Anyone that would advance the possibility of another 4 years of that is on the side of the enemy. This is what we have to rise up against. And I say all of that with a great deal of respect for John Oliver as a comedian and a broadcaster.
And said in one voice, loud and clear, fuck off into the sun, you cunts, fuck pigs and weirdos. You tossers, wankers, dick splashes and cockwombles. If Britain stands together this July the 4th, it will finally celebrate its Independence Day.
Well, I don't know about all that. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.